today's webinar, AI and Information Security, Empowering the CISO Office. I'm Teresa Resick, Vice President of Education and Research here at AIM. AIM is your host and producer of today's event. And Microsoft is the underwriter of our webinar today. We've been learning how artificial intelligence is transforming organizations, improving processes, and aiding productivity. Whether it's traditional or generative AI, the profound impact it's having on information security is undeniable. We're here today to learn how to identify and mitigate information security risks and to establish and maintain responsible AI practices. Combining AI with the human element is so important. So to tell us more, we have with us today Ryan Munch, who is the Principal Program Specialist for Microsoft's Copilot for Security. And we also have Mike Ward, who is the Compliance Technical Specialist at Microsoft. And so right now, I'm going to turn things over to Ryan to begin our talk today.
Hello, and nice to meet you all. It's first of all, thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Teresa, and to the AIM team as well. It's great to be here, and I always like talking about Copilot for Security. It's something probably new and novel to everyone here on the call, but for me, it's been kind of like, and for Mike and I, really, it's been our day-to-day and what we live and breathe and have been talking about for the past year. And we've had an incredible journey when it comes to AI and where we are and how we're thinking about it in a security context. And we've talked to all kinds of different customers, all of which are at a different point of their AI journey. So I'm going to talk a bit today about what we're seeing, how we're thinking about AI in a security context. And Mike here will hop on then and talk about some of the elements that he sees when it comes to customers and preparing for an AI journey and for the age of artificial intelligence when it comes to a security environment. Before we go in, I think just maybe turn it over to Mike really quick, let him introduce himself and any other additional thoughts there.
Of course, I'm the one that's going to talk on mute. I mean, somebody has to do it in the meeting, and I will go ahead and kick that off. Good day, everyone. Today we're going to kind of, as Ryan said, I work with various customers on really how to make sure that their environments are ready for AI, whatever that looks like, whatever sources it is, make sure their data is protected, there's nothing that's leaked out, to really kind of make sure that we're addressing things ahead of time before we get into the generative AI large language model types of environments, and we have data flowing everywhere that shouldn't be. So that's kind of where my role fits in. Right, like Ryan said, him and I work together on this kind of stuff on a day-by-day basis, really making sure that our customers are prepared for the AI journey. Very nice to virtually meet everyone and look forward to kind of a very informative and engaging conversation.
Thanks, Mike. All right, let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah, let me go ahead and just let me know when you want me to change slides, Ryan, and I will change them.
I got you. Thanks, Mike. So I like to think about kind of what we see today across the cyber spectrum of where we traditionally have thought about cyber defense, either like within our organizations or maybe even how we think about it in our governments in our respective countries. At Microsoft, we operate on a size of telemetry and observability that puts us in this very unique position to really get a good pulse on the trends overall in different cyber attacks. So when we think about 4,000 password attacks per second, that's what we're seeing across 4 of the largest commercial clouds in the world. That's informative for a lot of different reasons. It thinks about the scale of which we have to operate. It also helps us get an idea and a semblance, if you will, of the overall cyber challenge that is facing our customers. When I think about what I like to convey about where we are entering in the age of AI and what it means to how we need to think about security and security posture and what we need to really consider our organization, is that it comes down to the nature of an attack itself and what it takes to facilitate attack. So let's just say hypothetically that I want to go and get myself ice cream. And maybe I go to an ice cream store and I rob it and I get a single scoop of ice cream back. Low effort, low return. And so there's not a lot of risk there assumed from me in terms of my outcome as a bad actor in this case. But maybe I want to steal a whole bunch of ice cream. And then maybe I start to think about different ice cream trucks or ice cream factories, or maybe even entire manufacturing centers in which I could have ice cream for the rest of my life and probably, millions of people as a result. That takes a lot of energy and time, energy, and effort, as well as investment to scale up that level of attack. AI is the same thing. And one of the things that's incredible about AI and technology and what it takes to empower those types of systems is the amount of resources that goes into make it happen. So as a threat actor leveraging an AI powered attack, your cost of operation is going to exponentially skyrocket. So you either have to feather out and make more attacks occur, or you have to ramp up the scale of your return in what and who you do choose to attack. And that is an equation and a calculus that holds true whether you are the smallest threat actor or you're nation state driven. Nonetheless, the point to impart is that where we have been in security has very much been behind the game and trying to catch up to threat actors. And where we are now with AI and what it'll empower is not only what we can do to change our security organization posture and how we approach security ourselves, we also have to rise to meet the challenge of threat actors enabled with AI. And so across our customers and what we've done with market and research, and as well as just general conversations, like it is clear that there's a cybersecurity talent shortage, either in terms of expertise or simply the number of people we have in seats. And so we have to enable and empower and facilitate everyone to be better at what they do, no matter it is what context they operate in, to be thinking in a security mindset, to have security more accessible. Mike and I, we've been at this security thing for a long time, and you talk to Mike, and you quickly realize he's one of the foremost experts when it comes to talking about data and security and how to prepare for AI. But it took a long time to get there, and Mike works hard. He studies a lot. For everyone to arrive at that same level of expertise and understanding, well, that's what we need to change, and that's what we need to facilitate, and that's how we're thinking about AI in the context of security. Next slide. So we think about where our ecosystems are today, and really this is emblematic of every single organ, every single customer that we talk to. They have these highly fragmented, esoteric environments of all these discrete systems and processes and domain-specific languages, all of which take a lot of time, energy, and efforts to stitch together, and hopefully they arrive at some harmonious fashion that can ultimately secure and empower their defenders of their organization to secure their enterprise. Not, then it's a lot of late nights, a lot of incidents, and a lot of things that they have to go out and actively remediate. All of those individual skills, they're siloed, and it takes long tracks of expertise to achieve. Some of them don't even necessarily communicate. And what it does is it starts to create isolation of security processes and practices, where in reality, they should be sitting inside of every single function in an organization. What prohibits that from happening is the complexity of security. It is the nature of being able to understand it, to interact with it, and ask it any type of security question to get back a profound and relevant and contextually empowering result. And that is why we have all this speciality that exists inside of cybersecurity. And that's one of the things that when it comes to AI, we believe we can start to begin to fix and think about a bit differently. Next slide, please. So for AI and how we have started to think about empowering individuals, we can look at it from a number of different perspectives. How can we start to empower people to, well, understand something quicker, or approach a system, or ask a question for the first time in a very, simple way? Ask a simple question, get a profound response back. Or to be able to more readily assess those different systems. As humans, we have biases. Like I, for example, I came up in email security and threat intelligence and DevOps. And so when I talk about all these different areas that I like to focus on, or I have an expertise and a level of comfort, I could turn around and talk to Mike when it comes to data security and compliance and best practices on that end of the spectrum. And I quickly feel out of depth and overwhelmed. And in some ways, it even causes me to shy away from the conversation. One of the beautiful things about AI-empowered systems in operating in a security context is if they are provided the perspective of all these individual systems that need to empower decision or inform decision-making, it's like having a Mike Ward on your staff to be able to answer those questions, even if you're a Ryan Munch that has no clue of how to ask those questions or perform those tasks. It eliminates my bias of shying away from those systems or not feeling comfortable or even considering them. And that's how we like to think about what AI will start to fundamentally change. Doesn't matter your discipline or your role as what we like to term an operator. No matter how you choose to operate, you can start to include a security context. And through that, everyone becomes more productive and everyone starts to be empowered in their day-to-day task with the security mindset. Next slide, please. And one of the things that you see in general trends across AI systems, doesn't matter who you turn to. There are 326,000 large language models in the world. That's a ton. Which one do you choose? Are they all relevant for security? Well, no, not necessarily, because of all the things I talked about. There's all these domain-specific systems and languages and processes, all esoteric in nature. A single large language model is not going to be able to understand all of that. And similarly, you as leaders inside of a security organization have put a lot of time and investment, energy, and effort behind your people, your processes, and your systems. AI shouldn't be meant to rip and replace a system. It should be reverent and respectful of those investments, such that it can reason across all of those systems and empower you in your current context. That's the power it brings forward, because it can understand all of those things, eliminate the bias, and operate in those perspectives as an expert. So when we think about what AI will do in terms of consolidation, we like to think of it as kind of like one strategic vision. It'll start to redefine what security is and how security gets done. Security will operate with the operators in whatever context that they exist in, however they need to go against their day-to-day, but with a security mindset. It will allow them to operate wherever they need to, not go to another window or another console or consult 15 different sources, but work from one perspective and one unbiased source to inform the decision-making or operative processes. So with that, I think I've been up on my soapbox long enough. So I'm going to hand it over to my good friend and colleague, Mike Ward, to carry on. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. That was a great overview of kind of where we're headed in the AI world and security. So basically, I just want to kind of talk about what, just exactly what I do when I talk to customers is how do we prepare our environments for this AI invasion that is happening and continues to happen at way faster pace than most companies can adopt from a security standpoint. This comes from, we're going to kind of start with a zero trust approach, which is really key to making sure that your environment is protected. I mean, you have people who work everywhere. Obviously people are going back to the office, but you still have, some people work 100% remote. Some people work hybrid where they're at home, some they're traveling, those kind of things that we have been dealing with forever, but they really ramped up at COVID time and continue to ramp up. And obviously the threat actors have gotten more sophisticated with their tools and how to know if you're not sitting at your desk every day plugged into your computer behind the firewall of your company, to know that users and companies are now more susceptible than ever to attacks. People have their data everywhere. People have iCloud and all these other things that you store data. Companies have multiple clouds, whether it's Azure or Amazon or Google or whatever the case is. And then there's not a consistent way to really approach security. As Ryan mentioned, the systems are fragmented because this was the best of breed, so we bought this one. This was the best of breed, so we bought this one. And trying to make those systems interact with each other to help identify threats, very, very difficult to do without some very strong programmatic skills. And then there's like the environment's complex, and there's a lot of the zero trust really comes from the government. They're like the Department of Defense. They adopt a zero trust, and this is where this is built from some of the NIST specifications that have been released. From there. So this kind of really sums up what zero trust is. I'm obviously not really going to drain the slide because everyone can read, but it's really, looking at making sure things are verified, making sure that there's least privilege, making sure that you've got advanced detection in place, you've got real-time response. All of those things go into a zero trust type model from there. And Ryan, by the way, I forgot to mention it. I was went straight in. So if you see any questions in the chat, or Teresa, just feel free to interrupt, because no one wants to hear me talk for 20 minutes and without anything. So anyway, I digress. Really, these are the main principles of zero trust. Explicit verification, whether that's logging in identities, whether that's devices, whatever the case is, and give people just enough access to do their job so that it's not onerous, but they can still function, and you can kind of assume that there's not going to be an issue there. And then the biggest thing about zero trust is you always assume breach. That's the founding principle of, you assume there's a breach and you want to try to mitigate the damages of a breach, from there. So when we look at the different pillars of zero trust, everything starts with identities. That's really the key of zero trust, is logging into the system. Like I said before, the old days, if you badged into your office, you punched a code in, you sat at your desk every day, you were in the walls of the building, behind the firewall, logged in, left for the day, didn't take work home with you. Those are gone. So your identity is really the key to everything. Make sure that your end users' identities are protected, whether that's multi-factor authentication, conditional access. There's all these different tools that are available from various vendors to allow you to put some layered protection around the identities. You look at endpoints, obviously endpoints, laptops, tablets, phones, all those things. You want to make sure you have proper protections on the endpoint, so that if in the event the endpoint is stolen, compromised, whatever, you have a way to isolate that to prevent the spread of damage. Apps, that's the other thing. They're, again, the old days of every app is on a server in the building are gone. You have apps that are, software as a service apps. You have apps that companies have written that are available through a web, intranet, extranet, all of these are different things that way people access their apps. So we want to make sure that we have secure ways for the users to access those apps. Protecting the infrastructure, the network, those are definitely still relevant. Those are the things that we always have done in the past with intrusion detection systems, firewalls, segmenting network traffic, VLANs, all of those things still relevant today. And then data, companies, data, intellectual property, personal identifiable information, all of those things are very suspect if you don't have the proper protections in place to ransomware attacks, to end users stealing data, publishing it, like the WikiLeaks, all those type of things. Those are very, if your data is not protected with proper access and proper authority, then that can very much lead to a bigger problem, from there. So realistically, a very simple model of what zero trust looks like: identities, endpoints, you build policies, threat protection, you protect your network, and behind your network are your apps and all of those type of things. And you have continuous monitoring and analytics on the bottom to make sure that everything is protected, make sure that you're monitoring activities, looking for trouble, looking for problems, things that need to be patched, telemetry, all those type of things that we're looking for when we start talking about analytics and monitoring. We could spend an hour talking about monitoring and all the different things from there. Just know that it's very important that we know what's going on. So we kind of went through zero trust, and it's a journey. Zero trust is not something that you do overnight. It's a marathon. So if we look at, that's what when I've talked to customers and they don't really have zero trust much, it's really a journey. You start with the simple things, the low-hanging fruit, as a popular saying. Enabling multi-factor authentication, if you do not have that, that is one of the biggest things that can, slow down an attack. It's not gonna, I'm not never gonna prevent an attack unless you completely unplug and turn everything off. There's no way, you can do everything you can to prevent an attack from but enabling MFA and protecting that identity is really one of the biggest things that can come, from this. If you don't have MFA, you don't have conditional access policies, please, I can't urge you enough to really look at doing something around there just to make sure that your identities, your end user identities are protected from there. But, when we talk about AI, we'll get off that soapbox now and talk about data and AI, because that's really where we come from. So you start looking at, we talked about security. We understand what that is. Now compliance. Compliance means different things to different people. Compliance could be, are your devices compliant to plug into the network? And do you have the certain antivirus, patching, those things, all the way to regulatory compliance when we're talking about, do you fall under GDPR, for example, if you're have entities based in Europe? Do you fall under PCI policies if you're processing payments? Do you fall under HIPAA if you're doing healthcare? Do you fall under a type of SOC or SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley? Those type of regulatory compliances, we have to make sure that our data meets those too, because no one wants to make the news as a target of getting data breached, and then you have to pay millions of dollars. That's not the kind of news story that anyone really wants to know. So that's really when we talk about compliance. Compliance is a very broad term. It's a very broad component of that. Privacy is the next thing. Are we maintaining end users' privacy? Are we getting just the data that we need? Are we protecting that data? For example, if you process payments, are you eliminating that data as soon as you process the payment? Are you signing customers up and keeping their information protected so that there's not an issue? All of those things fall under privacy. And then responsible AI, that's really the model that, we take at Microsoft when we talk about AI. So responsible AI really is, we're not going to use your data to train our models. That's not going to happen. That's just summing up what responsible AI is, but it's, it's making sure that your data is yours and it stays with you, from there. So, I'm going to pause there for just a second to know if, does anybody, if put it in the chat, does anybody have any questions about zero trust? Are we understanding kind of where I'm going with this? Because it's a very complicated subject, very comprehensive subject. I really want to make sure that, I can drive home enough to understand that, identities, devices, compliance, privacy, all those things. And, do you understand what responsible AI is? Those are the type of things that want to make sure from there. And Wesley, yeah, so I'll send Teresa a link. We have a whole thing on zero trust there, but I can send you that out, and it really goes into some, the process of zero trust and what that looks like. And thank you for the resources. But yeah, we do have some more documentation from there. So in an educational background, that's obviously just like with the government space. So when you look at EDU and you look at, I say EDU, that's education. How there's various levels of zero trust that you can do from there. And I'm going to probably massacre your name, but Corvus. I apologize if I did that incorrectly. But basically, when you talk about zero trust education, students have devices. They have all of these type of things. From there that you give them. The teachers have devices, but there's it's really looking at what level you can deploy. I wish that I could say there's one shoe fits all, but it's not going to be. It's going to be really based on, if what kind of protections you have that are going to satisfy your zero trust, from there. Yeah. So Apple iPad, go ahead. I'm sorry, Teresa.
I was going to say, I have a question, because since we're talking about zero trust, how do you counsel organizations for weaving security into their governance practices? I know a lot of people on the call lean towards information governance being more of their primary responsibility areas. Um, can you talk about how they can influence people in those positions can influence these conversations in their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in reality, it's really about building security from the ground up. You can control who accesses the data. That's part of zero trust access. Limiting access to just the access that you need. So, you can set up different protections around this document is labeled with this type of information, so only HR can see it. For example, so it's really weaving in the topic of, for lack of a better term, role-based access. Everybody talks about role-based access. What is that? That's really making sure that you only see the data that you're allowed to see, and that all comes from, the group. If you handle, the identities, you handle setting up user accounts, you handle provisioning of users, you handle all that. So, how you have that conversation is you really just say, okay, we have this group of HR. We need to make sure that they access the things they need, because when they process payment, process health insurance, all those type of things that HR people do, that we limit that. So when we provision HR groups, you assign the privileges and the identities based on that group versus just giving a blanket, whatever access. So you can really get very granular with how you carve up access and how you do that. But it really starts with making sure that the data is not opened up to everybody. All data is opened up to everybody, because that's the last thing that you want. You just upload something to a SharePoint site, for example, and then everybody has access to it. You want to really make sure that you're limiting those access points from there. Okay, let's see. So the iPads, you can, there are software Corvus to control iPads that will work with various solutions. I know, you can limit what the devices. You can put monitoring on the devices to make sure that the users can only do certain things, the students can only do certain things. But from a Microsoft standpoint, we absolutely have tools that can work with uh, whatever device is, with that education suite, because we do offer an education suite from there. That say, I know Google is big in the education space. Apple devices are big. So there's, various levels of control that you can put from there. And so let me get, so hopefully that answers your question in a, as roundabout a way as I could really get to it. Zero trust homework, how do you empower? So that's a good question, Rachel. I mean, that really, comes, because obviously not every organization has the budget to have, you have a SOX group, you have an information protection group, you have an identity group, that's, very large companies that have that. But for smaller companies, there's, same thing about the EDU space. There are steps you can take to a zero trust framework. If you are, it's really about, how comfortable can we get with this? It's, you may not have the tools to say, or the resources to say, we're going to go and completely, let's just say you have workloads in Azure. We're going to completely do zero trust in Azure. We're going to do all the protections. That may not be a realistic possibility. Understand that completely, because not every customer has unlimited budget. No customer does really. And security, unfortunately, a lot of times doesn't get the forefront of the budget. That's just what I see from there. But it's really about finding out what comfort level you are with zero trust framework. It's, let's take the steps that we can to ensure that we have just-in-time access. That's usually a big one, to make sure that you're not over privileging someone or under privileging someone. So protecting identities with MFA, setting up just-in-time access, making sure your devices are patched and up to date. Those are some things that you can do from there, because if you've got one person that's doing it all, or two people that's doing it all, you've got to eat the elephant in tiny pieces. You can't just, eat the whole thing. So it's really about, taking care of that from that perspective. So hopefully that was, I answered your question. Let me reading Kevin's question here. Yeah, you're right. Older systems, definitely legacy systems, are very challenging, depending on how legacy the system is, because a lot of times in the manufacturing space, you've got systems that are, you know, don't connect to the internet. And I'll try to hurry, Teresa. I'm sorry, but we're having very interactive conversations here. Um, but realistically, when you start looking at legacy systems, you have to kind of find out what you can do from a zero trust. And, it really maybe comes to a point of you giving them just the access they need. If they have to talk to the internet, for example, you open up a very specific port for that, then you can set up something called privileged access workstations. Privileged access workstations are workstations that, if you have to access the system, it's a separate system. So for example, at a company that I was at before Microsoft, we had privileged access workstations. I had a separate login, a separate way to access the system. If I needed to do something that was administrative, whether it's managing email or managing whatever the case is, you have a privileged access workstation to do that. That way, my main machine, if it's compromised that I use on a daily basis, it doesn't get anywhere because it's not going to be able to access the sensitive information that's behind the privileged access workstation. That's something that when you look at legacy systems, you can really take a look at from there. Well, Ricky, that is a very, again, another interesting question, because as an end user and taking care of their devices, just like we have Microsoft, we have devices that I use my personal iPhone to connect into Microsoft. So what I had to do, I had to sign something before when I started working here that said, do you agree to allow, us to, monitor your device and make sure that my devices stays up to date on the latest software, security patches that are released, those type of things. And then the protections that are set up in our systems are then passed down to my phone. So even if I can't access the data from there, if I can't access something on my computer, I can't access it on my phone. But the way that you segment the data when you provision the mobile devices, you're allowed, when you set that up, you can put a wall between company data and personal data through the mobile device provisioning software. Our software, Intune, you can do that. I know that you can do that with others out there. But basically saying if you containerize the data on the phone, that's really what that's about, is making sure that corporate data is in this container, so that if I leave the company, or I retire, I win the lottery tomorrow and retire, then Microsoft, I can disconnect my device from Microsoft and erase every Microsoft stuff, but all my other stuff stays the same. So it's really about provisioning that personal device, and the user has to understand that there's going to be some capabilities that are going to be monitored, but your data is your data and company data is company data from there. So hopefully that was, again, a answer to the question. So we'll just kind of speed through this real quick, because I'm going to run out of time here. So you really look at, again, overprivileged users, device risk, governed data, and making sure that you've got control of whatever AI apps you have, whether it's our AI apps, Google's AI apps, Chat GPT that's on the web. You want to make sure that your devices are protected and protecting that data so it doesn't pass through to browser-based chat, chat bots and things like that. Okay, so realistically, how do we govern access to AI? Again, these are some of our tools. There are other tools out there that do this, so just ignore the name. I couldn't, but anyway, it's managing overprivileged users, whatever you use, whether it's Entra ID, which used to be Azure Active Directory, or you're using traditional Active Directory, or you're using, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you aren't overprivileging users, and you're trying to identify those risky users. What do we want to do? I mentioned conditional access. It's allow access MFA. What kind of steps do you have to make sure that, yes, I can connect, through my MFA, but is my device going to be allowed to be connected? Do I make sure that, am I up to date on my devices that are connected in, those type of things. And then, I'm making sure that you want to always make sure that you're monitoring events through your alerting systems, whatever that looks, again, whatever that is. And then I mentioned Intune. There's other endpoint management solutions out there, whatever things that you want to do. And I don't know why a C is above that. Just ignore that C. That's me putting together PowerPoint. But, make sure your apps are up to date, whether it's Word, PowerPoint, or, whatever you're using out there. And that's got, ours is called Copilot, but whatever that looks like, you just want to make sure that your devices are protected, your identities are protected. If you get nothing else from this conversation, make sure your identities are protected, your devices are protected, and your data is protected. Those are realistically things that need to happen before you jump deep into the deep end with AI, from there. Again, this is Microsoft apps, things like that, but you're really just kind of looking at, what are we doing here? Our data, we're just going to pretend that Copilot says AI, whatever, so we want to make sure that your data, your sensitive data protected, that when you pass down labeling on your data. So we're talking about labeling, that's labeling sensitive information, whether that's personal information, company information, intellectual property, any of that stuff. You got to make sure that that stuff is labeled and protected out there. If it's in a school setting, you want to make sure that you are your students' information protected, their parents' information is protected. Your teacher's information is protected. If you're in a government entity, same premise. You're in a retail, it doesn't really matter. Any data that you have, you want to make sure that the data is labeled properly. You want to make sure that you have proper data lifecycle management in place so that you're not keeping data too long. You want to make sure you've got data loss prevention policies in place so that make sure there's no data leakage. All the things that we all hear on a day-to-day basis, how to protect yourself, all that type of stuff, from there. So we get back to, we call it a cloud access security broker. That's what is that? That's really protecting those web-based applications. There's various models of those out there, that are available, to do that. But it's really about making sure that you're protected. It's layering protection, layering on protection. The more layers you have, the less likely you're going to be a target for attack, from there. So when summing this all up after the rapid scale of talking, make sure your data, you know your data. I can't say that enough. Make sure you know your data, you know what kind of data you have. You've got your data labeled with sensitive information types. There's also trainable classifiers that are in there. There's your contents labeled. So realistically making sure that you have information protection there. We hammered on the identities. We know what that looks like. All the identities are there. Make sure that you've got data loss prevention, data labeled, proper policies, proper data governance, data lifecycle management in place. There are a lot of options for endpoint DLP out there, but you want to make sure your endpoints are protected with DLP to make sure that I can't download stuff I have access to and then upload it to a Google Drive or iCloud or something else to share in the event I become a disgruntled employee. Those are super important things to make sure that we have DLP not only on the data, but you also extend that to the endpoints as well. And then lots of software has the ability to scan your data that's already there, apply labels to your data based on what that data is, what those policies look like, from there. Our solution is called Purview. It used to be called other things, but Purview really kind of is a solution that has the labels, the DLP, the trainable classifiers, the auto labeling, endpoint DLP, all these things I'm talking about. Those are all, from there. And then quickly, how can we do all that? We can do data leak. We can do, okay, I can do all that stuff. This is great. We DLP. So realistic, it's building DLP. We're developing what's going to be called an AI hub. So it's going to give, this is my Microsoft speak for just a couple minutes. But the AI hub is going to give you the ability to monitor not only the Microsoft Copilot, but also monitor the other third-party AI, generative AI that's out there, Bard, whatever the name of it is now, all these types of things that you get to the browser. You hook that in. So the AI Hub is going to give you visibility into that. Endpoint DLP we talked about, and then adaptive protection is really to kind of help identify those risky users who are going to steal data. Maybe they've put in their notice and they're going to leave, but they're going to take all the stuff with them. It's making sure that they only take stuff that they made that belongs to them, not stuff the company made. And adaptive protection is going to help identify those risks and make sure that identify the end user's risk from that standpoint. Data oversharing is the other thing. We're going to, Project Obsidian, all these type of things, but we want to make sure that we've got communication compliance in place. We can set up, and these are all things built into Purview. Communication compliance is going to, anything containing this project is going to identify. You apply a label to that through the SharePoint, whatever, and it's going to help identify that with information protection. That's your labeling, your DLP, all those type of things that we just talked about, from there. And then, you see what happens. The user's not going to be able to get their risky user. It's going to, and Copilot not going to share any of that because you're trying to ask Copilot, for example, give me access to this. It's not going to do it because you've got the proper labels in place from there. And then I think, let's see, that's going to be, what about, you talked about what data compliance. So we do eDiscovery too. So we got legal issues that we need to talk about. Like I said, data lifecycle management, that's setting up proper policies to make sure that you're not keeping data too long. And then of course, on the back end, you have the ability to search for everything through, everything is audited. All interactions, all these things are audited, from there. So we're back to this, sum it up with this. Discover, pretend over here is identity. Number one and foremost, discovering your data, preventing data leaks, and then have some sort of way to automate your data from there. And then there's some resources, and thank you. And now I'll get to the questions from there. So let's see where we go back here. Okay. You cannot run a device to personal, your device must be up to date. Yes, exactly, Jen. That's if it doesn't do that. Yeah, there are possibilities to do that. So basically, not only Intune, but other softwares will give you the ability to basically gatekeep devices. If you don't have antivirus software, if you're not up to date on that, so if you don't have, the latest security patches, you're basically in a holding pattern until you get that, or you can completely deny access to that. So that is very possible, absolutely very possible. When labeling content that uses Copilot with Purview or Discovery could. Well, I mean, it depends on how you have your policies built up, Sean. So if you label, if Copilot only has access to what the end user does. So if I'm using Microsoft 365 Copilot or Copilot for Microsoft 365, sorry, to search for all documents containing, maybe all documents containing Project X. If I don't have access to Project X, it's not going to return anything, from there. So, it's anything, that's why setting up proper permissions at the front of it is most important, because Copilot only has access to what you have access to from there. How many large language models did you say are in existence? Well, I do know that, Brian, you may can be better answer that than me because you're there, but how many large, and Katrina's question.
Yep, got this one in chat, but 326,000, according to what Hugging Face, which is an AI company, indexes in their large language model market, which tracks open source, publicly available large language models.
Yeah, okay, so there you go. And Jeremy, there's that, but I think that Teresa is going to send out the link to send these out afterwards, so you don't have to write down everything.
Actually, I just posted in the chat right now a link to a web page, our resources page, and that contains all of these links that are on the screen right now. So go ahead
Okay.
and click that and you'll have that open right now, folks.
Okay, if you have data classification and labeling, so Leslie, let me get for infancy. The first step, so realistically, data classification and labeling, if you're just starting out on there, it's really, I mean, you can get overwhelmed. If you make a policy too broad, you can get overwhelmed with alerts real quick. So it's really about starting small and, identifying the most critical things first, and then let the policies run in audit mode. And you can, when you run them in audit mode allows you to kind of see what's going to happen before it happens, so that you don't all of a sudden cut people off on their access to data, from there. So first steps I would be to build a policy around some, very broad, sensitive information there. So you don't, again, and then just kind of let it run in test mode or audit mode and see what happens, and then go from there. Okay, if you're starting from scratch and environment. Yes, Terry, absolutely 100% would definitely recommend that we have some sort of data protection, because if you have no walls up and an end user has access to everything, Copilot's going to have access to everything. So the biggest thing I can say is, if you're starting from scratch, migrating to SharePoint, I definitely recommend you have some sort of purview controls in place, whether that's, setting up sensitive information types and even DLP policies, and just manually apply labels and things like that. That's, mission critical to preparing your organization for Copilot, from there. Okay, and continuously requires it can be potentially impact the user's experience. Users may need to go through additional steps, leading to frustration. Well, I mean, I have lived and breathed that from the other side of the spectrum, Kevin. So it's when you start talking about zero trust and the impact of the users, it's one of those things that you really have to say, okay, we're going to turn on MFA. We haven't ever had this before, but due to heightened security concerns in the environment today, people working everywhere, you're going to have to take an extra step, whether that's using our Authenticator app, whether that's using RSA, whether that's using any sort of, YubiKeys, Windows Hello, anything at all to help the user get access to those things, from there, because it is very painful for the users to, if you've never had anything in place, to do there. And then the way you can ensure the best experience and adoption is education and training. I mean, that's realistically, you set up some champs in different areas and have the champs go through and work with the end users. I mean, that's probably the biggest key to success that I've seen, is having those champs in there when you're starting to roll out something new, whether it's, whatever that part of zero trust is, maybe the biggest one that I had to deal with was everybody had local admin access on their machines, and we had to turn that off because of problems, and that created quite the uproar. But having the security champs in place to kind of explain that you don't really need local admin access to do stuff, you don't need that. So having those champs can help ensure success. And that may be one person, it may be 10, it just depends on the need from there. Let's see, what kind of advice will you provide concerning? So false positives on data classification is a very real thing. You have to fine tune the labels when you start classifying data, and you go through and you see false positives in alerts, you see false positives in identifying data. It's really about looking at what your labels are, what results your labels are producing, and then making sure that you kind of fine tune those. And you can also adjust the mechanics of how, when it triggers an alert, there's ways to adjust that, from there. Okay. Where Purview with our upgrade to E5 still has some tuning issues. Also getting DLP. Okay, we're sunsetting 4th point. Okay, well, good luck, Sean. Definitely you're on the right track, doing those things. DLP, endpoint DLP, all those type of things are definitely going to set you up for success. All right, Leslie. What are some of the first steps? Data asset inventory if that process is in infancy. Yeah, so if you don't have an automated tool to do that, it's really kind of the way the systems work that I have, whatever system it is. If it's manual to identify data, it's going to be when that data is opened from there to look. So, the unfortunate thing is there's not a whole lot of automated back-end cold data scanning. It's what that's really called, from there. So it's really going to be a matter of, you can set up some high-level labels like on SharePoint sites, for example, as a default label, and then fine-tune that. You can apply a default label to everything, which I recommend a lot of times. So you can just apply a default label of, let's just say it's general. You build a general label, and that general label is going to have some parameters in it. You can then go back and make adjustments on that label from there. When you apply, if you apply a default label, that will then trickle through everything, and then you can go back and fine tune that to more sensitive data types from there. What is impact of DLP and its permissions that really drive the risk of oversharing? Not saying it's important, but yeah, you are correct. I mean, so think of Copilot in reality as a means to an end. So Copilot's going to help you organize your data, help you find data that you have access to. When you start looking at oversharing, that's when you have the proper policies in place to make sure that you're not going to overshare from there. So hopefully that answers your question in a quick manner. In your opinion, what risk over and above secure? Okay, what risk over? In your opinion, what risk over and above security and responsibility content management? I mean, outside of security, it's really about making sure the users understand, how to use the data and giving them proper education. It's really about, you have tools and tools and tools and to enable things, but it's really about making sure that they understand that, from there. And I'm getting the sign from Teresa that it's time to be quiet and hush. So any questions that are left over, we'll just answer them after the chat. So thank you very much. I really appreciated the interactive chat conversations. Ryan had to hop off to another call, so I will pass the thank you on to him as well.
Just want to remind everybody that AIM 24 is in less than 6 weeks away in San Antonio, Texas. It's the first week of April, and really want to encourage you to consider coming to the event. The website at aimconference.com outlines all of the agenda, the speakers, the keynote sessions. It is a full week of a whole bunch of activities. There's several pre-con sessions. So certainly registrations are open. Again, go to aimconference.com and to get all of the details and to register for the event. And we've been listening to Mike Ward, and earlier we heard from Ryan Munch from Microsoft. And I very much want to thank our underwriter, Microsoft, that without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you this free educational program. So thank you, Microsoft, and thank you, Mike and Ryan, for your time and this very thoughtful conversation today. I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, and have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in San Antonio in April.
Thank you all.